I'm actually going to put in the headphones so that I can monitor as well.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so it looks like it's going live, but it hasn't properly connected yet.
Okay, well, just a reminder that I'll have to jump off at a certain point. Is there a process that I should use to do that, or just leave?
Just whatever you feel like.
Okay.
You could say, we'd like to be able to say, give people an opportunity to say a quick goodbye. So if you can give us a little warning, that'd be great. And we'll.
The best way to do that would be how?
Just unmute your mic and just say that I have to leave in a minute.
How long do you
Do you know
plan?
around what time, Chris?
Yeah, they never gave me back a rundown, but like I said, probably around 8:15, 8:20 or so.
Okay, great. All right, so we're live. So welcome to anyone joining us on YouTube. We're going to be getting started in just a moment here. So thank you for joining us. So for those of you who are online, we're going to be beginning in just a minute. You can type questions in the chat on the YouTube page, and we will, as moderators, bring those into the conversation as we're able to. Okay, so we have, looks like we got about 13 guests who've logged in. It's always hard to say how many people to expect. I think we have about 50 who RSVP'd. So should we go ahead and begin? Sure. All right, Okay, so we have let's go ahead and start. 13 guests who've logged in. It's always hard to say how many people to expect. I think we have about 50 who RSVP'd. So should we go ahead and begin? Sure. All right. All right, well, welcome everyone. My name's Eric.
And I'm Meg.
We are from Strike Corps. We're excited to have some very special guests with us here today to share the stories of their organizing across the United States in preparation for May Day. The purpose of this call is to build new connections between movements and build momentum for May Day and beyond. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Meg and our special guests. Would you like to introduce?
Sure. Okay, so we're going to do a round of introductions. We have Carlos, who's joining us from Cosecha, which is an organization that's organizing for A Day Without Immigrants really successfully. He's going to be speaking to us about local and national organizing. We have Chris, who's coming to us from Beyond the Moment, and he's also working with the Movement for Black Lives. He comes from a series of different projects that he's doing in New York that he'll be able to talk to you about, as well as talk about some of the national organizing that's going on for that, both for May Day and for events coming up more quickly and things that are going beyond that. Jinzia was one of the national organizers and is a local organizer for the International Women's Strike, which was sort of the radical end of the Women's Day Without Women in the United States, and is working with the same organization to work on May Day coming up. And then we have Jose, who's coming to us from the
Food Chain Workers
Food
Alliance.
Chain Workers Alliance, who they've organized in the little I know about 300,000 people at this point guaranteed and are committed to strike And we're looking into that and seeing how that goes in the future. And we're really excited because I think multiple of our panelists have been in touch with one another, doing some great organizing work already. And we're here to just talk about building that in other cities and hearing about some of the connections that have already been made. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Carlos. Each of the speakers is going to spend about 5 minutes talking about organizing work that they're doing nationally and at the local level. And we're going to hear about collaborations. If you have questions going along, go ahead and type them in next to the screen on your YouTube chat. And we'll kick it off with Carlos.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos Rojas. I am a volunteer with the Movimiento Cosecha. We are a relatively new movement. But a lot of the folks that are working with us have years of experience, either working, with the immigrant youth movement that was born after 2008, working with faith communities, grassroots organizations, in immigrant rights groups, and so forth. Our model is 100% volunteer-based. So I'm a volunteer, but I'm a full-time volunteer, meaning that Cosecha is all I do. And we have me and other 24 full-time volunteer organizers who are kind of like the main support for all the local teams that we have working towards May Day. In early February, we had a national assembly with over 400 immigrant workers, families, parents, youth, and allies. And we had, and it was clear coming from the base, that they wanted to engage in a one-day strike on May Day. So we launched a 10-week campaign, both at the national and the local level. And I would say that now we have around 60 teams in over 50 cities in 30 different states that have committed to organize a one-day strike on May Day. So for us, the way that we're supporting folks, I think is mainly two ways. One is through a visibility campaign, and the second one is actually how do we support the local grassroots teams that are doing the work. And I think that visibility is huge, and our goal with visibility is basically to create a sense of inevitability around the strike. And I think that we're creating that. Basically, the strike is coming, and that's a given, so whether organizations support it or they don't support it, whether people endorse it or they don't endorse it, there's a feeling in the streets, at least from the immigrant community, that they shouldn't go to work that day, that folks shouldn't go to school. And it's very similar to what happened in 2006 with the mega marches, right? And the other aspect of it is more of the local grassroots support. And actually, starting yesterday, we sent out 16 full-time volunteer organizers to actually, we divided in four regions where most of the local teams are at. So we have the Northeast, we have the Southeast, we have the Great Lakes region, and also the Midwest. And the goal really is that over the next 5 weeks, we want to hit around 50 cities collectively, supporting the local teams on the ground, what we call the Cosecha villages, which is the organizing model that we use. And we're supporting them either with banner drops, community meetings, art and culture, street art, and different actions that we have planned on our national timeline. So that is basically where we're at. And just to close, I think just the biggest thing for us is that for folks that have been working on immigrant rights, for years, this is basically a deja vu moment of 2006 when immigrant communities self-organized the largest marches up to the history of the country, and for us, I think just learning the key lessons from 2006, where people didn't go to work, they didn't go to school, they didn't shop, is actually how do we take a moment to appreciate the resiliency of our people, that when there is actually more to lose, there's more threats to our community with Trump, increased enforcement, we have rogue ICE agents going around the country. Just yesterday, they broke into a family full of U.S. citizens and permanent residents, and they actually shot an older man, and this is happening in our communities, ICE brutality. And how in these moments we actually learn from these folks that even with all these risks, they're willing to risk more. They're willing to do more. And our community always understood that their main source of power rested in their labor. So for us, the primary question in Cosecha is actually, how do we carry that energy and sustain it for a longer period of time? So post May Day, we actually want to organize a larger strike. We want to sustain a 7-day strike because we know that we're not going to win anything concrete for a community on May Day, but we hope that we can convince the country that strikes are going to be a primary weapon to fight for change. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Carlos.
Wow.
Yeah, that's intense.
I'm inspired.
Very intimidated. All right, we're gonna go on to Chris.
Hey y'all, this is Chris. I am part of core leadership in the Black Youth Project 100's New York City chapter, and I also sit on the board on the national level. And the Black Youth Project 100, along with other Movement for Black Lives organizations, have come together to create a campaign that we call Beyond the Moment. Beyond the Moment is more or less an arc of actions, beginning with a political education on April 4th. And again, this is happening on the national and local levels. So I'm organizing it in New York City, but it's happening in other places, Chicago, New Orleans, in the Bay, and a number of other centers. After the political education on April 4th, we moved to May Day. And then most importantly, we moved towards thinking about what it looks like to organize across sectors on a local level in a continuous and unified way. So backing it up to the first part of the arc, the way we're thinking about this, at least in New York, is that what does it mean to get a number of different organizations operating on the broad left together in one room at the same time where they can dialogue? What does it mean for us to, that's not just about outrage or reacting to a particular thing, whether it be 45 or something else? What does it mean to get beyond traditional notions of sanctuary and other particular issues to actually barriers that might prevent us from working together, sharing resources, and producing something that's beyond a superficial notion of solidarity? So the political education is about that. It's on April 4th, particularly because we want to lift up the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's Beyond Vietnam speech. That speech is important for a number of reasons, but within it, he called for a radical revolution in values. And I think that that notion, the notion of a radical revolution in values, is something salient today. The other important part about that speech is that it's the makings of an intersectional critique, and we want to bring that critique into the contemporary moment in dialogue with a bunch of other orgs. So what this has looked like on the ground in New York and nationally has been less modeling what we'd like to see moving forward, having a bunch of different organizations get together on calls, share resources, divvy up the labor, share insights on what has worked or what might work in particular locations, and really make it so when we say we call for mass mobilization, that this is real and not superficial, that that mobilization is not just about bodies, but about minds, that it is about what we intend to do now, 1 month from now, 6 weeks from now, and far into the future. And this is what brings up May Day. For us, it's not about having a particular action that we're spearheading on May Day, but about hearing from other organizations about what they plan to do. We know that there's an IWS tour in New York City. We know that there's an immigrant strike. We know that there's a rally at B&H that's being led by some of our partners, and we want to figure out how we can support that while being able to uplift the issues that are most important to the movement for Black lives. And that's the persistent specter of anti-Blackness in the United States and across the world. So our objectives are really that, being able to, on April 4th, start this dialogue, to show strength on May 1st by supporting our allies that already have actions on the move, and figuring out a way where we can converge together. But then most importantly, on the local level, finding a way to, as Carlos said, keep the momentum going, whether it be through strikes, whether it be through political ads, whether it be through rallies and marches, whether it be through some of the direct actions that my org, BYP 100, participates in. I think that there's a real opportunity for us to support each other in genuine solidarity, as long as we're able to be honest and open about the places where we meet, hence the intersectional critique, and be able to acknowledge the places where we may differ in terms of strategy and the building that we still have yet to do amongst ourselves in order to properly create a coalition that is meaningful and sustainable. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I think we're going to have a lot of food for thought and discussion.
I'm going to go over to Cinzia with International Women's Strike.
Yeah, so I was one of the organizers of the International Women's Strike on March 8th. And for this day of action, we organized a national coalition of feminist organization, grassroots, immigrants groups, and also unions or the labor organizations. And the idea was precisely to put forward what we called a feminism for the 99%. That is a feminism that actually has the demands and needs of the most oppressed of women, working class women, women of color, immigrant women, trans women at its core. So, and we did this both because there was an international women's strike organized and planned for by Polish and Argentinian activists. And this international women's strike around the world put together around 50 countries. And of course, participation was different in each country, but in a number of countries, participation was actually massive. For example, Poland, Argentina, Italy, Turkey, Spain. The second reason why we wanted to organize this women's strike in the States was precisely because we wanted to offer a different kind of feminism to those women who have been left behind by lean-in feminism or corporate feminism, or the kind of liberal feminism that actually takes the conditions and needs of upper middle class white women as the universal, so as the exemplifying what the needs and demands of women in general are. Also, we wanted to point to the fact that while clearly it is very important that there is now a growth of mobilization and a momentum against the Trump administration, we wanted also to point out to the fact that Trump is an outcome of years of neoliberal policies and policies against the Black people and immigrant people. So in other words, our opposition is not just to Trump, and of course we want to mobilize against Trump, but our opposition is also against neoliberal policies in general, and policies against in general. Just to give an example, as you may of course know, Obama actually deported millions of immigrants during his presidency. So the problem of deportations and violation of immigrants' rights clearly didn't start with Trump. And also police violence against Black people clearly didn't start with Trump. So after March 8th, where we actually did manage to have a significant mobilization in a number of cities, and 3 school districts shut down because teachers called sick or took a day of leave. We decided after this to continue to work together as a coalition, as a national network, and we identified May Day as the central mobilization that we want to support. And clearly we are not the main organizers of the May Day mobilizations, but what we want to do is to support May Day coalitions in each city in which we are present. We are going to organize a national phone call with all the local contacts that organize the strike or some kind of event on March 8th in order to make this proposal of mobilizing in support of May Day mobilizations. And we will support every kind of mobilization, because clearly not everybody will be able to strike, or not everybody will be able to take a day off work. But we also want to strongly support the immigrant strike, the strike called for by immigrants organization. And our idea is also to go back to what Chris was saying, is that here, not only we need to build momentum and to maintain this momentum. So in other words, May Day is not the final goal or the end goal, in the same way in which March 8th was not the end goal for us. It was just a step within a process. And also we want to, within this process of building momentum and maintaining momentum, we also want to try to establish bonds of solidarity and cooperation that put together grassroots groups and communities that usually do not work together or have not worked together in the past, but that now may start trying to work together in solidarity, with the awareness that we may have some strategic differences or some difference in focus, but we can certainly converge on some common goals. And this is what happened, for example, on March 8th. And we can mobilize together around these common goals. And clearly, each of us will bring its own, our own perspective. And what we want to do for May Day is to bring to the mobilization a feminist perspective, so to articulate a platform and a perspective on May Day mobilization that has at its center women's labor and the work that women perform both in the formal labor market, but also outside of the formal labor market. And so what for example, in New York, what we are going to concretely do is to both support the activities of Beyond the Moment, which we have joined. And so, for example, the April 4th town hall, but also participate in the coalitions that are organizing for the march and rally on May Day, and possibly create there a feminist contingent that may appeal to people who otherwise may not be willing to mobilize for May Day, or who usually don't mobilize for May Day. So this is the contribution we are going to give, which is participating in local coalitions, helping with the outreach, articulating a feminist perspective on this mobilization, and also articulating a feminist presence, a radical feminist presence in the various rallies and marches that will take place around the country.
We're going to head to Jose.
Yes.
Thank you. So my name is Jose Oliva. I am the co-director of the Food Chain Workers Alliance. We are a national coalition of both unions and worker centers that represent workers in the food system. So we represent everything from farm workers to meat and poultry processing workers to working workers that move food to restaurant workers and grocery store workers. So altogether, our 29 organizational members represent roughly 300,000 workers. And back in early March, held a vote internally at the Food Chain Workers Alliance on what exactly we were going to be doing on May Day. it had been pretty obvious from the beginning of the Trump administration and before that, that things like a national right to work law inevitably going to happen during this administration for sure. And so we needed to do something that was going to actually create, as everyone on the call has already said, the momentum that we needed to not just stop this insane administration from moving those policies that are starkly anti-worker forward, but that we would actually pivot to a forward stance, right? That we would actually begin to not just fight back, but fight to win. And so in early March, we had a vote, and unanimously, our organizations all voted for a general strike on May Day. And so, the real significance of that is twofold. On the one hand, the fact that there are unions in our membership who have contracts, who understand the legal risk of going out on strike, who feel like there is no other recourse left, who feel like this is the time for us to actually begin to fight back and begin to win, creates a momentum in the labor movement overall, right? It creates a real stark difference between the folks in the labor movement who understand that they have to take a risk if they're going to win, in fact, know what the consequences are of doing nothing at all, right? We know that we're giving away everything that we have won, blood, sweat, and tears in the labor movement over the course of the last 150 years. But on top of that, we also know that if we don't fight back, losing something for ourselves as labor, but that there are countless other nations and individuals that are also going to be losing their rights. Like Shinzia just spoke about women, right? And Carlos spoke about immigrants, and Chris spoke about Black people who are historically, besides Native Americans, the ones who have been marginalized and brutalized the most, right? And so we know we're not alone. We know that this is not just about labor, and we know that it's not just about a one-time strike, but that we have to, in fact, organize ourselves cross-movement, and we have to organize ourselves in a way that is going to effectively change the tide and create the kind of movement that we need in order to restore, in order to actually win some of the things that we want. So what are we actually doing on May Day? First of all, it's a three-pronged strategy. We don't want to just have a one national day of action, one general strike, and then call it quits, right? We want to make sure that that is building towards something bigger. So May Day is actually a kickoff for us in creating some of movement collaborations. We're working closely with Carlos, we're working closely with the folks in Movement for Black Lives towards something that eventually will be a cross-movement platform that will eventually, hopefully, change the tide. So that's step one and priority one for us, is creating a cross-movement platform that really goes way beyond just May Day. Secondly, we have to dig downwards. Right? We I think in the labor movement have been to a great extent guilty of sitting on our laurels and feeling like we won what we won and we don't have to fight anymore. And so oftentimes, and I'm not speaking in general terms of all unions, but I know for sure there's several folks out there who don't have a culture in their organization, in their union, of internal organizing. So step two for us is we have to do some internal member organizing so that our members, our individual worker members, understand what the stakes are, that only comes through education, that only comes through this internal organizing that needs to happen in every single one of the unions, not just that are members of Food Chain Workers Alliance, but that go way beyond that. And then our third prong is based on the Central American model of witness, where we know that there are direct attacks to communities all over the country. We get calls every day from our members who tell us about the immigration raids or threats of violence and so forth. And during the 1980s, when there were civil wars in Central America, a lot of North American allies, especially white allies, citizens, would fly down to Central America and insert themselves in communities that were threatened with violence. And just their presence there changed the dynamic, right? It made it so that the Guatemalan army, for instance, where I'm from, was much less likely to go into that community and massacre people. That's the kind of program that we're launching now. And we want, partnership with any other allies who want to do something similar. But basically, it's flying folks to communities that are hotspots, and having those folks bear witness at the very least, and potentially even change the dynamic just with their presence, so that violence isn't exerted on our communities, and so that there isn't raids or mass deportations happening in these communities. So that's essentially our strategy, and again, on what all the other speakers already said, because their work is actually the spearhead of all of this, and we're following.
Great, thanks so much, Jose.
Yes, and thank you, all of you. It's incredibly inspiring work. And we're very lucky to have all of you with us today.
So people who are joining in sort of in the middle of what we're doing, these were some introductions to organizational work that's being done around the country. What we're going to do now is open it up for a discussion that we're just going to sort of very loosely facilitate. You can type in questions, and we have a few already coming from the audience, but just to kick it off, I think everyone sort of spoke about how May Day is a particular event that the bases that we're building will need to look to as an event to kind of get momentum going, but that there's something more significant happening with grassroots radical movement that's going on right now. So our question is, on May 2nd, I guess, like, what does a win look like? Like, what are you struggling for on that particular moment? And if we can just sort of talk theoretically about, like, what does a win look like for us if our organizing work is directed toward wins?
So is anybody interested in taking that question? I know it's a big one. Is anybody interested in taking that question first? So what does it mean to win on May 2nd and beyond? We're obviously in a really horrible situation in this country and on this planet. So maybe it feels like we're a ways away, but how do you see, what's the hoped for trajectory? Shinzi, I saw you unmuted yourself. Maybe you have a thought.
I can say a few words. I think, I mean, the question about victory or winning is a tricky one. And we saw this, for example, also after March 8th, when, not so many, but a number of people questioned whether the women's strike was a failure or not. And clearly the problem is, what are the criteria to define a day of mobilization as a failure? I think the victory is already in the fact that a number of grassroots groups and labor organizations and so on are actually converging on one single day of action where we can all work together. And this is already a victory, and it is an important victory in this country because we do have an enormous problem of fragmentation of struggles, and also for reasons that are understandable and are historical reasons, but there is also an element of mistrust or diffidence among various organizations. So, organizing together, mobilizing together is the best way to try to overcome. In other words, because this is a practical issue, so we need to start doing things together and finding ways in which we do these things together in order to build this solidarity and trust again. So already this is a victory. Secondly, level of unionization in this country is extremely low, and it has decreased over the course of the last 30 years from 20% to 10%. So 10% of the workforce is unionized today, and in the private sector, only 5%. And already the fact of being able to speak about strikes and having people who are available to, to also face some risk and take a day off or strike or organize wild strikes. I think it is very important to overcome this situation, in the sense that clearly we are in a situation in which, if we want to have a new season of struggles that involve workers, and particularly immigrant workers, women workers, people of color, working people of color, and so on. We do need to find ways in which we combine together conventional forms of organizing and striking, so through unions calling for strikes, and unconventional forms. And this is what, for example, we tried to do on March 8th, and I think this is also what the immigrant strike tries to do. In other words, we cannot rely only on the existing labor unions, which doesn't mean that we are in competition with labor unions. It means that we need a convergence of different forms of mobilization, and only this convergence can overcome the isolation of workers in the workplace. So I would think that already having, for example, a mass of people striking with the unions or also without the unions and taking to the streets, together with the other people who are not striking but who are supporting this effort and who are mobilizing in other ways, this is already an enormous victory. So we cannot measure our victory only in terms of what we will manage to gain in terms of our opposition to Trump's administration, because we are in a situation of still weakness, but again, organizing solidarity and mobilizing is a way, and building these networks is a way to overcome this weakness. So this is a long process. So we shouldn't just focus on the singular event.
Thank you, Cinzia. Well, I think that might be a good starting point. Carlos, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, as you all know, or you may know, we in Cosecha, we launched publicly, in July of 2015, and from day one we were talking about the idea of having a 7-day strike, and just the reactions from people today when you talk about a strike is so much different than back then, So I think that victory for us on May 2nd, as I had said earlier, is just the acceptance, the wide acceptance of a strike, and non-cooperation with the system in general, to be a tool that can be used for change, just like we use our electoral power, that we can also use our labor power, our economic power, to make an argument for change in this country. And I would say also, in the immigrant rights movement, that we fundamentally start asking a different question. And I think that over the last 10 years, the primary question that we have asked, right, to the broader public, to the American public, has been, do you like immigrants? So do you think that they're good people? Do you think that they should be welcomed? Do you think that they deserve to be in this country? Do they deserve citizenship? That has been a question that has divided the immigrant rights movement. The question whether we all deserve it, or some of us deserve it, and bill after bill after bill, right? We have seen our communities being divided and pit against each other. So by engaging on boycotts and strikes, we actually want to change the question and the framework from do you like immigrants to actually, can you recognize that this country depends on immigrants? And if you were to implement 45's plan overnight of mass deportations, isolation, and building walls, that the economy, because of the capitalistic system that we have, will not be able to function. So there's a deeper argument, that if immigrants and people of color in general didn't comply with the system by not working for a longer term, that this country will not be able to function as a nation. So that's what victory looks for me on May 2nd.
Chris, would you mind speaking to this a little bit as well? We were talking earlier in the day about how kind of the position of the organizations that Chris is working with kind of sees the strike as a narrowing of the set of objectives. I'd like if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, before I do that, I was wanting to jump in to speak, echoing Cinzia's comments and lifting up Carlos's about the notion of a win. And then I'll get to that point, to clarify that point, I guess. For us, I think thinking about a win operates on a couple of different levels. The main one is, are we talking to each other on May 2nd? And if we are, how? And by we, I'm talking about the various organizations we're bringing together. A win means that on May 2nd, we're already planning what we're going to do next. A win means that we acknowledge that May 1st is simply May 1st. And while we can build strength through May 1st, while we can continue momentum and build stronger ties through it, the question really becomes on, as I mentioned, what we're saying to each other, how we're talking to each other, and what we're centering. And this is the second layer. From the perspective of BYP 100, which is a Black-led organization interested first and foremost in the liberation of all Black people, we would say, where's the conversation about anti-Blackness? Can we call on the organizations in our coalition to show up when there's another killing of a trans Black woman? Can we call on organizations to show up when someone is being evicted for their home because of permanent exclusion policies? It's why we see the local mobilizations that we'll be pursuing after May 4th to be one that thinks about this notion of sanctuary and expands it, that renames it. And I think that when we do something like that, we're able to speak to issues that affect immigrants, many of whom are Black, affect women, issues that affect workers, basically rolled into a critique of capitalism in the way that really rains down on all of us in specific ways. And if we're not having those conversations, if we're not using that language, then we haven't won anything, no matter how strongly we show up on May 1st. To your point about strikes, I just want to say, I didn't mean to say that striking is narrowing. What I mean to say is that to focus exclusively on a strike as a coalition would be narrow. And I think that sentiment has been echoed by everybody on this call. I mean, I don't take the immigration strike, the immigrant strike, or the goal of a 7-day strike to be a suggestion that this is the only method that works. I don't take it that, and I take with some of the other comments that have been made about other ways that we can provide safety for each other, other ways that we can support each other. So when I talk about narrowing, it really was just about the way we see it as a strike being a good tactic that makes sense for some, and a tactic that's not accessible for others, or might not make sense in other contexts. And so again, it comes back to the conversation. How are we talking to each other? How are we supporting a strike while strikers are supporting other initiatives? If we can be having those conversations on May 2nd, then we certainly will have won.
Thank you. Agreed. It's a very powerful vision. It seems like one theme that we're coming back to is the need for what we might call intersectional solidarity between different groups of people who are oppressed in different ways, in ways that are also connected. It's been a struggle for as long as I've been involved in activism to try to build that kind of solidarity. We're in a moment of, I think, unprecedented mobilization, maybe, maybe a moment of unprecedented crisis, although we all know this didn't begin with Trump and it won't end with the defeat of his policies necessarily. What can we do in our movements concretely right now to strengthen the kind of intersectional solidarity that we'd like to see? Yeah, just from your own experiences in organizing. Are there specific practices, a mentality, anything? I'd love to hear what anybody has to say.
I mean, one
I just spoke, so I
critical.
was hesitant to speak again, but I'll quickly say, listen, and be ready to hold what other people have to say, even if it's unpleasant. I saw that Jose was going to speak, so I'll let him jump in there, but I'll leave it at that. If we listen and be prepared to hold other people's pain and struggle in a respectful way and in a way that allows us to dialogue, then we can begin to build something that's akin to intersectional solidarity. But listening is crucial to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What I was going to say is that there's a sort of inherent contradiction in our work, because in order to build power, we need to build organization. But you can't build organization with ego, right? If you have leadership at the front of an organization that thinks of themselves as the only ones that have the answer, or even thinks of themselves as people who have the whole answer instead of people who have part of the answer, and it's necessary for them to connect with others who have the other pieces of the answer, I think we're doomed to continue to make the same mistakes historically that other social movements that came before us have made, right? And so to me, really, this is a movement that's going to happen with or without organization, right? We know that things are going to happen on May 1st, with or without us. And our role as organization in movement is to provide infrastructure at best, and to maybe provide some leadership. But it is not to take advantage of the movement. It's not to take credit for the movement. And it certainly isn't to try to make the movement do what we want it to do. It really is about us being infrastructure for the movement, and leave it at that and create the kind of conditions so that that movement can go further, right? So to me, answering the question of how movement is built is something that intersects with both organizational, sort of the life expectancy, if you will, of an organization, and how we as individuals interact in those organizations and how we put our egos at check.
Anyone else want to speak to that?
Can I add a few words? I completely agree with what Chris and Jose said. What I would like to add is also that there is especially in the, I must say, in the US left, at least in my experience, there is a bit the tendency precisely to think that there is only one good way of struggling or fighting, or one good strategy. And therefore to tend to dismiss other forms of mobilization or other forms in which people get organized. And I think we need to overcome this. So what if we look, for example, at what happened in the first months of Trump's presidency, we have a rather long list of very different forms of spontaneous and organized mobilizations, from, you know, the occupation of the airports against the Muslim ban, to the Women's March, and then the women's strike, the day of mobilization of the immigrants in February, the taxi drivers strike, the bodega strike. So in other words, we do have really a variety of forms of mobilization that often are also spontaneous, and that reflect also the way in which we, of course, we are all affected by the by Trump's administration policies, but in general by the conditions of capitalism. But we are not affected in the same way, because clearly the way in which we are affected depends also on our status, race, citizenship status, gender, and so on. So one way to rebuild solidarity, perhaps, is also to stop with the idea that mobilizations that focus on specific conditions or specific forms of oppression are divisive or are taking away from some form of abstract general mobilizing that should involve everybody. This is actually not the case. In other words, one way, at least in what we have experienced with the women's strike, is that it is by making visible and apparent the different ways in which women are affected by male violence, by the violence of the state, by the violence of capitalism, according to their race, their sexuality, their class, and so on, is actually an element of force and not an element of weakness. In other words, we need to build solidarity not by making abstraction from differences or from specific demands, but on the contrary, by combining all the specific demands and different specific perspectives in solidarity, so in a general opposition and general mobilization that keeps all these elements together. So just to make this more clear, even the Women's March, of course, had a lot of limitations, but one of the critiques that were waged against the Women's March of January was that it was an identity-based mobilization. What does this even mean? An identity-based mobilization. In other words, women are half of the planet, and there are very specific ways in which women are oppressed that need to find a voice. So this is not taken away from anybody. It is not divisive. It is not something that takes us away from the goal of the general mobilization against capitalism or against an administration. And the same can be said for Black Lives Matter or other movements that are based on making evident and opposing specific forms of oppression. So I think we need to rebuild the capacity of recognizing all these different struggles and all these different demands and needs and perspectives, because they're actually a possible source of wealth, in the sense of some of strength rather than of weakness, if we are really welcoming them and if we are really open to recognize the differences among us.
Hello, yeah. And just to add to that, wait, hold on. The echo is crazy. Hello. Okay, I'm just gonna try it with this echo. I would say for us, in Cosecha, which sees itself as a movement that wants to become a popular movement in the country. It's really how can we be both a popular movement, but also be a movement that's eradicating messages of anti-blackness, anti-queer, which are in our community. And I think it really starts by analyzing how this language of criminality, or even this tagline that Obama loved to use, felons, not families, that we're gonna go, ICE is gonna go after criminals, and how pretty much we had 3 million deportations under Obama that became acceptable because we were saying that we're going to protect families and not criminals. And when you look at the issue of detention and deportation, even though the immigration issue is largely painted as a Latino issue, right? People that are often more criminalized than not are Africans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, and how that's not really made it's not at the center of our movement, you know. And I think in these times, we're really learning from solidarity, you know, with Muslims, you know, through the airport actions, pushing back on Islamophobia. But we also gotta, you know, within our own networks, within our own bases, you know, when I'm engaging with workers, and just to be honest, it comes up all the time, you know, the issue of criminality. I'm not a criminal, and this is why I deserve papers, right? I deserve citizenship. But how do we eradicate that? Because one, that only makes the deportation machinery stronger, and it makes it easier to target our own folks. And we already lost 3 million under President Obama. But also that, how do we push back on that to actually create solidarity across the board with all movements? So I would say that the issue of detention and deportation is a clear example as to why movement solidarity is not just like an added piece of the menu, but actually centered to every movement, you know, because that's how they divide us, you know. And at times, some Latinos don't like to think that there's Black Latinos, you know, and how do we bring that to light, and how do we center that?
Great, thanks everybody. I think it sort of sounds like, broadly speaking, we sort of have the same approach and theoretical approach and philosophy on moving forward as a movement that sort of includes one another, but it's kind of centered around maybe our communities. And I think some of the questions coming in on the YouTube live feed sort of speak to sort of questions about the specifics of how we move forward. If we're on the same page that we should be working together and that we should be fighting for one another's issues, are there things that your organization has been doing to build those cross-movement coalitions? Has it been difficult? Has it been successful? And if you can talk just a little bit about that, so that for the rest of us that are trying to do the same thing, we can have a better idea on how that really is working concretely, or what we need to do differently.
Maybe as a starting point, so my background's mostly in the labor movement. I did some work to try to support the women's strike on March 8th. The only communication I received from the union that I'm in is to not strike. I'm wondering, and this to me seemed like a severe breakdown in solidarity, and really a very sad situation where the organizations that people built through struggle are actually being used in many cases to contain and limit struggle. So I guess one place to jump off might be, how do we deal with the unions? Another place, as the token white man on the call, you know, the problem in this country is white people, mostly, in my analysis. People, just white workers since the very beginning, since 1607 in Jamestown, not having solidarity with Black workers or African people brought here as slaves. So I'm not going to ask you about, you know, what I should do to, or what any of us should do to end white racism, because, well, you can share your thoughts if you'd like. But yeah, so this to me, the big limit here seems to be we've got 60 million people who voted for this guy who's basically a fascist. And then even beyond that, you have millions more who are not engaging. I mean, there's been an inspiring upsurge, right? But still, there are the people who are not participating vastly outnumber the people who are participating in any social movement. And so how are we dealing, maybe a way to take this question is, how do we deal with these limits? The limits of institutions that are limiting the movement, or of whether it's white people or white workers or workers of different ethnicities, or individuals of different ethnicities who aren't yet ready to engage. How one way to take that question would be, how do we engage with that? But you could also take it in a different direction. Chris, I saw you turn off your mic, so we'll go to you if you'd like.
Yes, I turned off my mic before you had that intervention, which has shifted some of the things that I had to say. So if I could somehow try to attempt to speak to what you said in the previous question coming from the audience, I'd like to take a couple of steps back and speak on what it actually means to organize in our own communities. And this is something actually that I thought Carlos was speaking to quite vividly and honestly. One of the challenges that we face at BYP 100 when we're doing our organizing in our own communities is the fact that we hit a wall when it comes to certain folks' view on trans life, on queer life, the way certain manifestations of masculinity comes out. I mean, this is before we even get to how we, the practical ways that we build solidarity with other people outside of our own ranks. It really is about trying to figure out a way to not just activate and mobilize all the people that you were mentioning that aren't mobilized, and there are many people in the broad spectrum of the Black community who aren't. There are many people in the broad spectrum of the Black community who has a conception of safety that's still predicated on the police, that's still predicated on the state, as opposed to one that's predicated on community strength and community trust. So I think for us, what's more important than anything else, even in a moment when we're emphasizing cross-sector, cross-movement mobilization, is the ways in which we bring back the lessons from those conversations to our communities, the ways in which we're actually activating those communities by showing that we're a part in them and building trust. It's completely one thing for BYP 100 in New York City to street team in Brownsville, which we have done. And then it's another thing to host an event in Brownsville and have all of the people that show up be folks in our demographic, people that don't necessarily live in Brownsville, people that are between the ages of 18 and 35 that are, have a different socioeconomic position perhaps than some of the folks in Brownsville. And I think this is a real challenge no matter who you're talking about or who you're talking to, whether it be the women that voted for Trump and IWS, whether it be immigrant communities who harbor strong senses of anti-Blackness and notions of criminalization that do the movement harm. So, pushing this conversation and question to some of the others on the panel, I actually sincerely wonder steps we're all collectively taking or within your movements to deal with that fact. First, recognize the people who are not in the space when you're meeting, and what are the things that we're doing to try and get them into the space? What are we doing to reach them where they're at? So when we're trying to mobilize as a cross-sector trans movement constellation, we're actually bringing the people for whom we purport to act.
It sounds like a wonderful question. Would folks like to comment on that? I'm a teacher, so sometimes if nobody answers the question, you just call on people, which students hate, but we might maybe be able to do that. I think that for Jose, I see you unmuted yourself. Would you like to, do you have some thoughts you could share about doing this kind of organizing?
No, what I wanted to do is go back quickly to the question of institutional barriers that you brought up, which I think is a really important question that I think in almost every setting we have to confront. And I think it's especially salient in the labor movement, and especially with unions, the reality of contracts that have no strike clauses, that are legal documents that unions cannot break, right? Because if you break that contract, the employer can break the contract, and that means everything from the raises that you've won to whatever other benefits you have are in jeopardy. And so that's a reality. And whenever I talk to our union brothers and sisters, it is very clear that that is the number one sort of the pinnacle concern that they have around calling for on May Day. That being said, there are plans to get around that. I know plenty of union folks who are talking directly to the employer and just letting them know this is not a strike against you. This is not a strike to breach the contract. This is a strike around these particular issues, right? And they have been successful in convincing those employers to close down voluntarily, right? And in most of those cases, they have relationships with the employer, not necessarily always good ones, but they have a business relationship with the employer. And so that conversation is possible. And so that's something that I just want to flag for folks who continuously see that as an obstacle, who see that as sort of the reason why they can't call a strike. This sort of, golden rule in the labor movement. You can't call a strike because that'll, break the contract. And it isn't true, right? People are doing it. There's plenty of unions that have already called for a strike that have solutions for that problem. So it really is more around this institutional fear than it is about actual obstacles that's the legal ones.
That is great news.
Yeah. I guess one of the questions that I have, if we're maybe moving on from this set of questions, is, has it been easier for folks to work with sort of rank and file or more ready to be militant unions, or even general mainstream unions, or community organizing organizations that, and how are you building a base from those two various methods? For those of us who are looking to expand movements in our particular cities, where would you suggest going in one of those directions?
Can I add one thing on? And maybe adding one thing onto that, going back to what Christopher mentioned, getting people involved who maybe are not involved in any organization yet. I mean, if millions of people strike, it will be millions of people who were not previously part of a union, most likely, or a community organization. Yeah, maybe, Carlos, would you be willing to speak to that a little bit? I think that you guys have developed a real model around engaging people who were not previously engaged.
So I just wanted to say, that we in Cosecha have a one-day training that we basically systematize, and we have a network of 40 trainers in the country that are able to provide this training for new folks that want to get engaged. And our training, in our training, we have this module called Our Power, which basically outlines the American system. So it's a critique of capitalism, individualism, consumerism, in a way that you can explain it, to immigrant workers, who are not in an academic setting, who may not be woke folks, who do not have this privilege, to navigate, in these spaces. And we draw a criticism of capitalism, but also through a lens of gender, racism, anti-blackness, anti-queerness, and how that's actually promoted by the system itself. So we do want to create that awareness from day one, and kind of proactively push back as to why, when we say we are not criminals, we're throwing half of our community under the bus and not creating any space for solidarity across movements. But to get to your deeper question, I think that we've been able to resonate with folks who are not coming from or organized networks, because in Cosecha, before we launched publicly, we took 18 months just to do two main things. One thing is to really analyze 2006, to understand why we got to that moment, and to learn key lessons as to why we weren't able to win back then. And then second, just talking to workers across industries. And we realized this process happened in 2014 and 2015. And we realized two main things. One thing was that there was a feeling of betrayal from the Obama administration, because in 2008, immigrant communities across the country, people of color, we literally handed Obama the keys to the White House, and we did it again in 2012. And because it was very evident, because DAPA was failing in the courts, the immigration bill was dead, and all we had was really DACA, and over 3 million deportations, that there wasn't a believing government. There wasn't a fundamental belief that the parties can actually solve this issue for us. And the second key learning that we found out is that the idea of the strike was growing in the communities, and people were talking more about strike internally, but they weren't ready to engage in it because they didn't think that the majority of folks would do it. Like they have this thing, if we're gonna do it, we all gotta be united. Tenemos que estar unidos, la unión hace la fuerza. That's what workers tell you, And then what we realized is that after the election results, that not having that belief in government actually expanded to the rest of the country, because all of a sudden, especially white communities started saying, well, this is the worst thing that has happened in this country, even though it's not true. But there was a more evident, exposure of America for what it has been for minorities, people of color, and poor people. And because we understood workers where they were at with the strike, we understood the feelings towards the political parties and this sense of like, we have nowhere to go. We were able to engage workers that have been disenchanted both by the political parties, but that also didn't find their way into organizations, because at times they were just working two or three jobs, or the assumption was kind of like, if I'm going to join an organization and they're going to bet on the Democratic Party, I don't want to be a part of that. So there was a need for something that said, we're not going to fight electorally. We're going to fight with our labor, and that resonated with workers. And I say that's why we've been able to attract so many people to our networks.
Great.
That's extremely exciting.
Do anyone else who wants to speak?
Yes, on the issue of what experience we had with the community organizations and labor organizations. So I think so. First of all, we actually try to create some coalition that both on a local and national level would put together labor organizations and community-based or grassroots organizations. And in this, we had, for example, good experience in New York with the New York State Nurses Association on the one hand, and with more UFT on the other. And so, it was absolutely possible to work together and to cooperate. So I don't think that it is a matter of choosing, especially if one creates social coalition, but rather to find ways in which these different ways of organizing can talk to each other. And often going to union bureaucracy is not the best way, although with some unions actually, more radical unions, actually, union leaders can get on board and so on. But one way to go is also to go to appeal, especially to rank and file organizers or to left caucuses, more radical caucuses within existing union. For example, MORE, which is the left radical caucus of the teachers union. So the relation with the union doesn't mean necessarily just relation with the union leadership or the formal leadership. It is actually important to get on board the rank and file organizers. And secondly, we also made the choice of not being just a coalition of existing organizations, but also being inclusive of individuals. And for example, in New York, we are finding ways of organizing, of internal organization that take into account the fact that some people are there representing organizations or groups, but other people are actually there because they don't have another political home, and they became politicized or radicalized in the last months, and they want to find a home where they can work together. And it is very important that whatever kind of network or coalition we build, that this coalition should also be welcoming to individuals, precisely because we want to grow. We don't want to just speak to the usual organizers. But this also means finding organizational ways in which individuals can have a voice. So in other words, in which they are not entirely, their voice is not silenced or powerless because there are other people representing groups. Of course, this is a very delicate balance, but equilibrium to reach. But I think it is very important because one concrete possibility is that in the next months we will face a process of increasing politicization and radicalization of people who are new to politics, are new to demonstrations, are new to marches, and so on. And we need to find ways in which our organizational spaces are welcoming to these people. Another thing, and this has to do also with gender relations, what we are also doing, for example, in New York, is to have a support working group that, for example, is going to organize childcare for each of our large meetings. Because one important issue to take into account is that the people often may actually be willing to participate in meetings and in organizing and so on, but they simply can't because of the burden, or because of time. So also in this case, for example, providing ways in which women's reproductive role, social reproductive role is taken into account. So, for example, there is childcare, or children are welcome to the meetings. I think it is very important because otherwise the risk is that precisely the people who are most exploited and have less time are the ones who cannot participate in meetings that actually have to do with their own life and with their own demands and needs.
Thank you. I think we're hearing a lot of wisdom from the experiences that all of you have brought. I feel like I've learned a lot, and hoping that our viewers have too. I know that a couple of our guests have to leave in just a moment. Mute. Okay, there we go. I know that a couple of our guests have to leave in a moment, so I was thinking we could maybe transition now to some closing comments. Any final thoughts you'd like to share? I think people are particularly interested in concrete ways to get involved in what's happening on May Day, and of course also beyond the moment. And we will also, if you have any links to literature or websites and other resources, we'll ask our guests to email those to us, and we'll post those on the YouTube page in the description. I know that Carlos and Christopher, you both need to leave a little bit sooner. So Carlos, why don't you share your thoughts, and then Christopher, if that's okay? Because I know, Carlos, you have to go in about a minute. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, totally. So for folks that want to be engaged, that want to learn more about what's going on in your city, or you want to join any of the infrastructure teams, I just shared the website. It's www.lahuelga.com. That just means the strike, literally. So that's LAHUELGA.com. And you can also text Huelga. It's not case sensitive. So Huelga to 41411. And then we will have you in our database, and we can call you. We can connect you locally with the coordinator in your city, or if you want, if you happen to be in a city that hasn't signed up to be a part of the strike yet, we can give you all the materials, toolkits, resources. Yeah, and we have that for days on how to organize your city, your community. Yeah, so, and just for closing comments, I think that, again, we just have to appreciate the moment, especially the risk that people of color want to take right now, where there is more, there are more threats to our community, and families, immigrants, people of color are willing to risk a lot more. And I think that they understand, especially on the immigration context, that we have trying electorally for over the last 10 years, and we need to add something else to that electoral power, and we are seeing that our labor, our consumption, our contributions to this country are maybe part of that missing puzzle that's being needed, to actually win some concrete change. So I'll just close with that.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Carlos.
Christopher?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Concretely, if you are in New York City, I would invite you to come out to the teach-in that Beyond the Moment and BYP 100 and all the organizations that we're working with are hosting. I will make sure that Eric and Meg have all the information about that. So folks, again, if you are not in New York City, luckily there are people organizing in many different places. In fact, the reason that I have to run is because there's a national call with over 800 people registered for it, talking through similar things about how people who are not in cities that are currently plugged into this can be plugged in. So there's plenty of opportunity for that. On a smaller level, I would invite you to join the mailing list for the Movement for Black Lives, visit BYP 100, definitely plug into International Women's Strike. They have a very inclusive space. But most importantly, choose where you go before May Day. Based on your theory of change and the things that ignite you, you'll be able to find a welcome audience wherever you choose. And taking place at all is suggestive of the fact that there are many spaces that are available. So concretely, if you're in New York, join us on April 4th. There'll be information available to you about that, which is geared towards leading up to May Day. Plug into any of the organizations that are represented on this call and more. The Movement for Black Lives is always a good resource to plug in, and Beyond the Moment has a website that should be live right now that not only allows you to plug into what's going on in different places, but offers a toolkit for you to host your own events on April 4th, and will continuously provide resources for you to use to mobilize in your city or plug into things that are already happening in your city, should you choose to. And I want to thank Eric and Meg for hosting this and allowing me to be a part of it.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. I know you're incredibly busy organizers who probably live on conference calls, so thank you for fitting us into the schedule. Shinzia, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, so first of all, I think the May Day is going to be great. And again, this is not the end goal, but it's going to be a great day of strike and struggle. So what I would suggest is, first of all, to check whether there is a May Day coalition in your city and to join it. And we will probably be there if we are present in the city. We are going to also organize within a week or 10 days a national conference call of those who are interested in participating in May Day from a feminist perspective. So in case you are interested, you can contact us through our website, which is www.womenstrikeus.org. And we will really try whenever we have enough people and we are present, we will try to have feminist contingents at all May Day marches. And in any case, we will also share materials and flyers and posters that support the immigrant strike and the other mobilizations for May Day, but with a special focus on women, immigrant women and working class women.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you again.
Jose?
Yeah. Oh, there's a very strong echo. Oh, there we go. I was going to say there's a couple of things that I would encourage folks to do. We put together a Be Solid website called May Day General Strike. I shared that link with you all, and maybe you can put it on the chat for folks to look at it. But the website has a couple of key elements to it. One, which I think is the most important, is we have a crowdfunding link because we know that there will be retaliation against folks. There will be people who will be fired as a result of their participation in the May Day strike. And we want to be prepared. And so we want to start a strike fund. We need everyone's help, especially because a lot of the folks that are going to be striking are not in unions that have strike funds, or worker centers don't generally have strike funds. And so we need all of your support to help build that strike fund. So look for that. And then there's also obviously the Rapid Response Anti-Retaliation Network that I spoke of, where we're looking for folks to have legal minds, but beyond lawyers, right? I think anyone who wants to be part of the witness program, I think it'd be fantastic to have you. And then there's also, we're trying to make this into a labor clearinghouse website so that unions and worker centers, regardless of their sector, whether they're in the food system or not, that they can put their strike and their actions up on the website, and folks can join them, or they can find a strike near you. Other than that, I want to say that we are committed to working beyond May Day, and we want to make sure that this is not something, excuse me, that is a one-off event, but that in fact we are building towards a movement. We know that we're swimming against the tide, but we also know that the fact that Trump came to power is a symptom of people being sick and tired of the neoliberal capitalist policies in this country and in the world. And if it demonstrates anything, it is that there is an opening, there is an opportunity for the left to actually organize people, working class people all over this country. So we want to join you all. We want to make sure that we are providing that infrastructure that this movement needs. And so we want to be there. We want to go beyond May Day. With that, I just want to thank you all, the organizers of this call, and everyone, all the other panelists, and everyone who watched us this evening. Thank you.
I think that was a great one. We appreciate everyone. I think that one of the things that we can all say we hope to get from conference calls like this, and it sounds like they're going on in different places, is that we're not talking to each other enough, at least from our perspective.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we share some common goals, getting people involved who haven't been involved in organizing work, but figuring out how to navigate some of the difficulties with existing organizations who A, aren't used to working together, and B, aren't used to talking about ourselves as workers. So we collected information from folks about things that are going on in different cities. We got responses from about 35, 40 different cities. So we're sharing that information. We're hoping that helps us connect our organizations to places that individual organizers are working in and not necessarily linked up with us with these particular types of struggles. So yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. Maybe the last thing we could say, hasta la huelga, as they say.
That's right.
Thank you for organizing this.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Sigma in the streets.
Yep.